At the Imperial Center, the ruling seat of the Shi'ar, whose empire extends over half the known universe, the powerful Grand Council of Shi'ar ministers watch as the Phoenix Force returns to Earth. Their ruler, Lilandra, declares that if this universe is to survive, the Phoenix must be destroyed. Jean Grey lands on Earth, confronting her family, but she is soon attacked by the X-Men, who try to use a scrambling device to dampen her powers. During the battle, Jean has a brief moment of lucidity and begs Logan at the end of this, while the human part of her is still in control. However, the Dark Phoenix quickly overcomes the Scrambler and freezes all the X-Men in place with her telepathy. This gives Scott a chance to talk to his longtime love, and he starts to reach out to her, only for Xavier to arrive and attack with his own formidable mental abilities. And the two then engage in a massive telepathic battle with one another. Xavier is able to lock Jean's Phoenix persona away thanks to Jean's own side of her personality, helping Charles along the way. Jean returns to normal and she embraces Scott. The X-Men are approached by Jean's family, who try and help Jean, only for the entire gathered team of mutants to vanish before the family's eyes. The X-Men have been taken by the Shi'ar, and the gathered group of aliens demand the Phoenix be destroyed. Jean wiped out an entire solar system and a Shi'ar warship and must answer to these crimes. The X-Men are shocked to learn of Jean's actions, having been completely unaware of them, but only Scott fully appreciates the complicated psychology going on behind the Dark Phoenix. When possessed by the Phoenix, she was an unrepentant murderer, but now Jean can barely come to terms with her own recent actions. Charles intervenes as he knows Shi'ar law well and demands Jean's fate be decided by duel. The intergalactic community agrees to these terms, and the next day the duel begins. The Imperial Guard is ordered to square off against the X-Men until one team is defeated. The mutants are transported to the blue area of Earth's moon, a strange place of ruins with a normal, Earth-like environment. The X-Men and the Imperial Guard battle and engage in this strange land. After a prolonged fight, Jean is forced to tap into her powers heavily, and the Phoenix re-emerges. Lilandra panics, and Charles agrees with her to abandon the duel and contain the situation by any means necessary. Xavier contacts Scott and tells him to attack Jean while he still has a chance of doing some damage to her before her powers fully reawaken. Scott tries to knock some debris on her, and soon the rest of the X-Men join in trying to drain Jean's powers. This manages to work and the transformation is aborted, and Jean regains control. At least for now. But she better understands herself and realizes her true nature because of this experience. Her and the Phoenix are symbiotes and cannot exist without the other. There is no separating, controlling, or removing this cosmic power. So she begs her friends to kill her before inevitably she kills them. When they refuse, Jean shows them that she's already transforming back to the Phoenix, and the Dark Phoenix will certainly follow. There's no stopping this. Wanting no more deaths on her conscience, she freezes Scott in place, walks up to him, and removes his visor. Even as he begs her not to, she only says that she loves him. Scott's optic energy completely destroys Jean's body, and Summers is left devastated, along with the rest of the X-Men. And that's it for the original Dark Phoenix Saga. I do have to say, in the context of revisiting this to better understand the context of how one storyline could get so much attention from the fanbase and even the film industry, this is one heck of an X-Men story. It's amazingly well drawn and deeply evocative in its artwork. Jean's death is remarkably well done in that regard in particular, but the whole thing is like that. John Byrne doesn't make the violence of Jean's death all that obvious either, and he's pretty subtle in how he puts that page together. And in the end, it's just this haunting result. He's a huge part of why the Dark Phoenix Saga works. In a big story with two new mutants who would go on to become major X-Men, the Hellfire Club making this big play, and finally the unexpected and devastating breakdown of a core founding member of the X-Men, this story arc kinda has everything. Perhaps what is most impressive about all of this is that everything we know about this story behind the scenes does not suggest it was all that easy for the creators behind this comic. There was a lot of debate about the nature of Jean's character relative to the Phoenix Force, with editor Jim Shooter and Chris Claremont not agreeing on how much the Phoenix was a separate entity against Jean Grey's own troubled psychology. The debate went back and forth throughout production of the Dark Phoenix Saga, to the extent a large portion of the final issue was redone to accommodate some last-minute decisions. Given all that debate, it's amazing how little that is felt in the actual comics themselves. Chris Claremont does an excellent job in navigating all of this conflict, and did an even better job at making the nature of Jean's transformation ambiguous. With stuff like an apparent death and Mastermind brainwashing her, it's unclear what exactly happened to Jean in this storyline, even after all these decades of X-Men comics that would follow. To the credit of the many X-Men writers that would follow Claremont, it's always been pretty unclear what the nature of the Phoenix Force truly is. We know that it's about as powerful as Galactus, and about as ambivalent towards the death of an entire planet's worth of people as Galactus is. Sometimes the Phoenix has been vicious in its path of destruction. Other times it's been directly responsible for saving the mutant race. The Phoenix and its nature has never been clearly stated, which is exactly how I like it. That it is this mysterious and unpredictable force makes it scary, which is great. It's by far one of the most appealing aspects of the Phoenix Force. Now, all that being said, is the story so great that it deserves 2 movies and a full season of animated television. And it's particularly weird that even though there's been 2 movies that have adapted this storyline, both movies have left so much of the original comic out in their goals and ambition. It makes me wonder why this story in particular was so attracted to Fox back when they were in charge of this sort of thing. I suspect, at least in part, this is because this story is full of stuff Hollywood loves. Classic tragedy, romance, and most importantly, a powerful woman being put in her place. The shame of that last particular point is that Chris Claremont as a writer was never like that at all. Jean Grey is brainwashed and turns violently evil after getting a massive power-up for no apparent reason. But those sorts of things were perfectly normal by the standards of X-Men at this point in time. The fact that Jean is a woman is incidental. Claremont spent much of his time with the X-Men tying them up, making them go through laboriously complicated soap opera level drama, and having them go through all sorts of weird transformations. Hell, all of these things happened to other members of the team in the Dark Phoenix Saga. And it truly didn't matter whether they were men or women. People have actually gone through Claremont's comics and counted up the number of times men and women were captured and held in bondage, and it actually happened slightly more to men. That is what Chris Claremont was all about, using comic book tropes in creative ways to not abandon them entirely, but to break barriers when it came to how men and women were treated in these comics and their tropes. And the best part of all of it was he did it in both directions. Female characters got to have more agency and be stronger main heroes in a story, while men were allowed to be vulnerable and even weak in moments of crises. You'd be surprised at how rare these things were in earlier comics. But even by the relatively high standards I hold Chris Claremont's comics, I do have to say the Dark Phoenix Saga really did come across as special in revisiting it here. Because while Chris Claremont had already been doing a lot of the things I have been just talking about, in terms of equality and how it dealt with its characters, this story arc did something new that hadn't been done by Claremont, or really by a lot of comic book writers at this point, that was hotly contested behind the scenes, because they straight up killed Jean Grey. This wasn't like today where that sort of decision is basically mundane, and had been done 100 times before already. This was at the time basically breaking rule number 1 at Marvel. You were never supposed to kill off a main character like that. But they did it anyways. That was part of the debate going on behind the scenes, and now it's one of the better remembered X-Men stories. I think there is a lesson there, though it should be noted now, if Marvel were to kill off a main character like this, most fans wouldn't even notice. And that's kind of where I stand with the Dark Phoenix Saga. It's a groundbreaking story in an already groundbreaking creative run. It's a sort of legend on top of another legend, and very much deserves the praise it receives, even though if by today's standards, this story wouldn't really be doing anything new. In part, that's because the Dark Phoenix Saga did a lot of those tropes and ideas first. Let me know what you all think in the comments section below. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and keep reading comics.